Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
It was very territorial, even back then, and straight white guys who were a little weird were very low status. You know, a lot of this was happening in music. You know, like being a fan of Korn was like, oh, you're going to kill everyone at school. You know, it wasn't like celebrating weirdness. And then you fast forward to today, and it's like now the weirdness has become an insult. So I don't know. I mean, it's very regrettable how, in spite of the fact that the left can't meme, at least allegedly, they can still like frame narratives and propagandize with the best of them. And every facet of the like JD Vance discourse is basically a reaction to some like crappy framing that has come out of, you know, left politicians or media organs. And that's unfortunate. So now they have a VP candidate of their own who looks like he lives in a van down by the river. And, you know, we'll see how that works out for them.
Hello, and welcome once again to the Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast here at the American Mind. This is your host for today, Seth Barron, managing editor of said website. I'm joined by editor of the American Mind, James Poulos, and Spencer Clavin, the special editor of the American Mind and associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books. Well, the news is out. Kamala Harris has chosen Tim Walz, or Waltz, I'm not sure, governor of Minnesota as her running mate. Speculation has circled around Governor Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania and Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona, among others, as the possible helpmeet to Kamala Harris. But Shapiro, who seemed to many to be the obvious best choice, given that Pennsylvania is a key swing state, he rankled the far left of the Democrat Party. He was seen as too soft on school choice and too much of a Zionist hardliner. And the Zoomer Hamas fans who comprise the Harris campaign staff seem to have militated against his selection. Waltz is comfortably situated to the left, some would say the far left. Yes, he supports Israel, but at least his name is not Shapiro. And he gets hugs from Ilhan Omar, who, you know, has bemoaned Zionist hypnosis of the whole world. The online promoters of anything that Kamala does enthuse that Waltz will lock down the white working class vote and deliver the entire Midwest, possibly, flipping Ohio, preserving Pennsylvania, who knows, Indiana and Iowa. Others see a hardcore Minnesota liberal in the tradition of Hubert Humphrey and Walter Mondale. For instance, Waltz claimed that there was a direct, unbroken line between Duluth lynchings 100 years ago and the 2020 fentanyl overdose of George Floyd. He supports driver's licenses for illegal aliens and signed a bill to put tampons in boys' bathrooms in schools. So what do you guys think of the choice? How does Waltz balance the ticket, and do the Republicans have a lot to be afraid of?
I don't see much to be afraid of, aside from all of the many things that there already are to be afraid of if you are a GOP person right now. This guy is, he's really not of the same caliber as a politician as someone like Shapiro. The visuals are not super great. I don't think anyone would really describe him as telegenic or charismatic. He's really most notable, I think, for basically being the informal founding member of White Dudes for BLM, based on his performance during the race riots there and all that spun out from it. So it seems to me, and I don't think I'm alone in this, in surmising that Shapiro basically said no. I think there was some concern On the Harris side, that he was a little too hot to trot ambition-wise, and probably there was some concern on the Shapiro side that the ticket just wasn't good enough, and that he has a better shot at a better political future if he just sits this one out. So, not a match made in heaven. They turned to the guy in the number 2 slot in the rankings. That's Walz, and I think it shows. Deep down, I still believe that whichever ticket has the best sounding names together is going to win, and usually does win. I'm sort of struggling to think of a ticket that just sounded bad that did really well, and I don't know. I don't know if I can come up with one. Nixon Agnew doesn't sound great, but they didn't actually win. Agnew got thrown in there, so that's where I'm at on all this. I think to try to give at least a little bit of the opposing view, the logic for Harris Walz sounds terrible, is that this is a guy who can hoover up and possibly even, lock up those people who think of themselves as normies, but are probably further to the left than they want to be, at least in their dreams of being a normal sort of middle of the road American voter. And they think that this is kind of what they have to do in order to counteract all of the inroads that Trump has indeed been making into the non-white voter base. Lurking at the heart of all of this is kind of Jewish Civil War stuff, where the deep divides among American Jews across the two political parties or across the right and left really getting worse, and this seems to reflect that in some way. So last I checked, in New York State, among Jewish voters, I think it was voters or likely voters, one of those, Trump holds a 1% edge, 50 to 49 over Harris. So all this is just heating up. And, for a guy like Walz, race riots are no bigs. So things could really get hot if they decide to go that way.
Well, clearly the solution to the name problem is just to bill the two of them as Kamala Walz, Kamala Walz, No, I mean, I don't know. I guess I sort of feel the way that Dems must have felt when they heard about the J.D. Vance pick, or at least I understand how they must have felt now. Like, here's this guy that probably makes perfect sense internally from within the party's logic, within the party's aesthetic, to rile up the people that get really excited about Democrat Party current year 2024, and who are already like on board with the whole idea of Kamala and that she's very brat and so forth. Walz is the inventor of the weird trend, so far as we can see, and therefore maybe has some cachet in that, to me, seemingly very astroturfed, but to some others perhaps persuasive, like media blitz. But from outside, much as Vance seems to confirm and embody all of the worst fears and caricatures of the MAGA movement and the Trump ticket, this Walz guy, whom I admit I just heard of 5 minutes ago, seems to just kind of double down on all the stuff that is most loathsome and unappealing and grotesque about the entire Kamala Harris project. For me, the worst Harris moment remains her advertisement to people to donate for bail funds during the 2020 riots. And this is the guy that answered that call. Like, Walz was probably smashing that donate button when Kamala posted it. And they were made for each other in that sense. I agree that the Shapiro optics are extraordinarily unsettling to anybody that knows how to look beneath the surface of the debates that must have been going on. Even hearing on the top level, just podcasters and members of the commentariat gingerly nudging their way around this problem that you basically can't have a powerfully pro-Israel Jew on the ticket in this current Democratic Party. that is all, forebodes much darker things to come, bigger fights down the line. But it kind of looks like with this pick, both parties have now just really gone all in for the Platonic archetype, or like the Hegelian thesis antithesis of their ideal selves. That's kind of what this looks like to me. And so I'm mystified by it. I find it disgusting, and just like they both give me the ick, but they're not trying to win me over. They're trying, I guess, to meme a youth vote into existence out of Mamala the brat versus Trump and weird Vance. So, like, if that works, I'll be very depressed. But that does seem to be the play.
Yeah, certainly it does. I mean, it's been what has it been, like 2 weeks now that she's been, essentially the presumed nominee, and she has yet to answer a question from the press, do any kind of interview, or even publish a campaign platform. Like her website, the campaign website, I mean, as it was under Biden, has no specific details about what it is that they want to pursue. It kind of seems like maybe this is the new post-politics moment we're in, at least for the Dems. Like, okay, the last time they basically just had a cipher as a candidate, Biden, and they kept him indoors and away from cameras. And they just counted on the press to, just trumpet about how great it was to have him. Seems like they're doing the same thing this time. They can have Megan Thee Stallion, or, whoever they get next, like Chappelle Roan or Taylor Swift, or I assume they'll get like some kind of big stars to headline her events. And then she can come out and say a few words, but it's not really important. All that matters is, black woman. And she's not Trump. And Walz, I saw something the other day on Twitter. It was like, look, Walz is in the driveway playing basketball with his son. Can you imagine Trump ever playing ball with his kids? And then people pointed out, well, yeah, he was just playing golf with his son Barron like last week.
Right.
That doesn't count. And then Walz, I guess, was changing a spark plug. I think the play is going to be like, here's a real Midwesterner.
Yeah, it's like Ted Lasso versus Walter White is how they're going to portray it, right? Like the nice white Midwesterner guy versus the totally psychotic, pent-up, toxic masculinity Arizonan gone wild.
Yeah. It's so funny how much they hate J.D. Vance. Yeah, right. Walz was I don't know if he invented the weird thing. I think he was just the most enthusiastic early adopter of.
Oh, interesting.
That
I've heard him portrayed as having like workshopped it kind of in real time on MSNBC. I don't know if he probably wasn't the first person to call Vance weird.
I would doubt that he's even like that savvy to come up with like this is a strategy. I suspect it was fed to him, but maybe not. And I have noticed all this stuff about all these speculations that JD Vance wears makeup, and all this laughter about it. But I mean, I would think that they would be approving of men wearing like eyeliner. Although, I gather other people have said there's no way he's wearing eyeliner. He just has like gorgeous eyes. And like, there's a lot of
yeah.
I don't know.
He does have rather nice eyes and pinchable cheeks. No, I mean, it's like there's a that has always been a weird, although not totally psychologically incomprehensible feature of the genderqueer stuff. Is it's aligned with the most juvenile schoolyard taunts at anybody who takes up the mantle of something like masculinity. Like, so anybody who would suggest that actually maybe you shouldn't wear makeup then instantly comes in for like jokes about how they get in prison. I mean, it's just really seriously. Yeah. I mean, it's like, no, it's true. Really bad.
It is kind of like disorienting and frightening the more you think about it, to look back on like the past 20 years, basically since Fight Club, probably. 1999. And the messaging that went out to like young heterosexual white males was, you actually can't be weird. You're not allowed to be weird. That's cultural appropriation. Weird is the space for queer people. It's the space for, people who have been marginalized. These are our sacred spaces. These define our identities. And if you guys flat iron your hair and put on guy liner, then it's really cringy and gross. And if you paint your fingernails, then, you're trying to pretend to be something you're not. No, if you are a young straight white male, you actually can't, even goth, like that's kind of like, very low status. You're not going to be allowed to sit at like the table of the theater kids and, the like college identity festival table. It was very territorial, even back then. And straight white guys who were a little weird were very low status. It's a lot of this was happening in music. Like being a fan of Korn was like, oh, you're gonna kill everyone at school. It wasn't like celebrating weirdness. And then you fast forward to today, and it's like now the weirdness has become an insult. So I don't know. I mean, it's very regrettable how, in spite of the fact that the left can't meme, at least allegedly, they can still like frame narratives and propagandize with the best of them. And every facet of the like JD Vance discourse is basically a reaction to some like crappy framing that has come out of, left politicians or media organs. And that's unfortunate. So now they have a VP candidate of their own who looks like he lives in a van down by the river. And, we'll see how that works out for them.
Well, I like that point a lot, James, about weird and what it is that like white men are supposed to embody culturally. I mean, because I guess if you look at it from the outside, well, Tim Walz and JD Vance are kind of, I mean, they're both fairly normative in how they dress and present themselves. So I guess the Democrats are going to try to make it a fight about who's really a representative of the white working class. I don't know. It's strange. It's a really I guess I don't really have a lot of places to go with it. I mean, it just seems like the whole weirdness thing. I mean, if you look at the Democrats, they're so obviously the weird ones.
Right.
I mean, look at Adam Schiff, Jamie Raskin, Charles Schumer. I mean, I guess I'm just listing all the Jewish Democrats, but I don't mean to be. I mean, they're all like total freakazoids from top to bottom. So I guess it's this insane, projection. Like, no, we're not. He's the weird one because he wants you to marry a woman.
It kind of breaks down into this semantic turf war between weird and cool, and like normal is the territory in which that turf war is being fought somehow. It's like the thing that the double bind that James is describing is that whiteness, ironically, given all the accusations that have been leveled against it in recent years, was actually kind of pinned as this vanilla, boring non-identity. It was this non-culture. If you're a white guy, and if you look and act like a white guy who is straight, then what that really means is you have no culturally interesting markers. You are this neutral cipher.
Right.
And then, of course, that's not a very comfortable position to be in. So there's all sorts of true and authentic things that people in that position tried to do to kind of maneuver their way out of that. But it turned out that they actually were serving a purpose in that role, that the counterculture really needed them to be in. They needed the vanilla, boring white guy to like get stuck there so that they could claim all the cultural capital and cachet and all the cool. And then I think now the difference between JD Vance and Walz is like, you can be that boring normal white guy now, you just have to apologize for it and participate in the hatred of its boring emptiness as an identity. Whereas if you're Vance and you're actually, first of all, not all that boring and vanilla in reality, like
Right.
the guy has all sorts of features that you could point to that distinguish him, set him apart from your quote unquote average American, but also heartily in favor of normalcy and like aspiring actually to like positive goods such as marriage, heterosexual marriage and child production, then you are not simply boring but evil and need to be sort of categorized as some kind of like fringe marginal element in society. Anyway, I guess like the the game is very much rigged in that way. And for me, the question is, okay, yeah, so they're clearly the weirdos. There have been some good memes around this. Like JD Vance is weird and it's a trans D&D basement dweller or whatever. But if the left is not as aesthetically good at memeing as some elements of the right, it nevertheless has a much larger cultural apparatus at its disposal to wield for it. So even if even if Waltz is like just as bad as we say he is, do we have the like? Is the meme economy such that renegade anons have the same kind of cultural capital that these like mainstream organs have that are trying to make out Kamala to be brat? I don't know. I don't know where we are on that.
It reminds me of when Mike Pence had his, it turned out he had this rule just for himself that he doesn't take meetings with women one-on-one in his office, and he doesn't go out to dinner with women one-on-one, which to me just seemed like, oh, well, that's a very efficient protective rule to inoculate oneself from accusations of sexual misconduct. Like, it just can't happen.
And why would somebody want to inoculate themselves against such accusations in the 2020s?
Right. And it was taken up as like, oh, well, that's just because he's such a creep that he assumes that he can't control himself in the presence of a woman. So they want it both ways, obviously, and to make it like that was the thing. Let me just add one little thing about the vanilla question. I've even seen, and this is just funny when people reify their own stereotypes. I've seen these people debunking vanilla-ness by saying white people think that they own vanilla, but actually vanilla comes from Madagascar and is a brown seed. So don't think by calling yourself vanilla that you have, you're really just appropriating, an African flavor. Of course, that's absurd. We don't really have to go too deep into it. And, anyway, let's move on to something else. There was a somewhat spectacular assassination last week when Ismail Haniyeh, the political leader of Hamas, was killed in Tehran. He was in town for the inauguration of the new Iranian president. Yes, I'm not going to say Iran. I'm going to say Iran. And he was staying in his favorite room in a guest house run by the Revolutionary Guard when it evidently blew up, killing him and his boyfriend or bodyguard. It's unclear, but no one else. At first it was reported that it was a missile strike, but now it seems that someone planted a bomb in this room months ago, preparing for Haniyeh to occupy it when he could be killed. Now, clearly, Israel is implicated in this, though they haven't said anything about it. Assuming it is Israel, it's diabolically brilliant because it shows that they can reach deep into the heart of the Iranian power structure and kill their enemies at will. And it also shows that they likely have a lot of collaborators among the Iranian elite. So the Revolutionary Guard, the mullahs, have arrested dozens of people. I'm sure there's horrific tortures going on right now. And they are beating their chests about going to war. They're going to offer a real, not a formal response to Zionist aggression. But it's unclear what they're going to do and how effective it would be and what it all means. I mean, it's not as though Israel killed a top Iranian official. They killed a Hamas official. I don't know. Anyways, what do you guys think? Are we going to war?
My sources say no, and by my sources, I mean the voices in my head. It's definitely been unnerving to see the whole panoply of the conflict post October 7th because of the way that this conflict has the potential not just to be the kind of general war in the Middle East that we're all supposed to not want, but because of where technology is going right now. Those videos of, Israel using drones or whatever to sort of like gun down some people running away, that kind of stuff is unnerving for all kinds of reasons. But what we're looking at now is something that seems much more of a kind of classic limited conflict involving proxies, statecraft preventing things from escalating too much. It can be frustrating and it can be confusing, but whether it's the Houthis sinking some ships, but that not causing World War III, or Gaza going through what it's been through and that not causing World War III, and the Saudis, standing with some people but not others, and it's all this kind of jockeying. We saw a lot of this kind of jockeying between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and it's feels a lot like kind of great power politics, where the second tier countries might sort of trade blows, but the big guys on the block make sure that it all doesn't go up like a tinderbox. I mean, there's still a segment of the commentariat that wants us to believe that it would be really bad if Iran got the nuke because the mullahs are crazy and they're willing to blow up their own neighborhood in order to get rid of Israel, and they want to blow up the United States. They want to turn everyone in the world into Muslims. And I can't comment on what's going on in the heads and the hearts of the mullahs, but I can comment on Russia and China really having a powerful set of incentives to prevent that kind of thing from happening. They don't want Iran to go off the rails doing these kinds of crazy things. Certainly the Saudis and the Gulf Arabs aren't interested. They're already saying, like, look, if you shoot rockets at Israel and they pass over our airspace, like, we're going to respond adversely to that. So in spite of the fact that so many things seem to be going off the rails in so many ways right now, there are still actually some pretty powerful guardrails. And those guardrails, by and large, I think are, the first rank great powers in the world. They're at odds. They're kind of, building these opposing blocks. But I just don't see how any, Russia, China, the US, I don't think any of them really want a full blown war. Everyone's kind of weak. That's been my working thesis for quite a while here. Everyone but Donald Trump, I guess. And what that means is more vulnerability all around, more conflict, but also I think an understanding that taking all this to the next level is going to move the conflict into a very hard to control, very hard to understand place, especially because of technology. So, I think we're fortunate that things haven't gotten worse. I think they probably will continue to get worse, but probably ultimately in a modulated way.
So yeah, that would suggest that Iran is not sitting around thinking in a strategically serious way about how to build a global empire, which sounds right. It's easy to forget that because the religious dimension of the Iranian state is extremely millenarian. And oh, yes, there will be a global ummah, and all people sort of one day down the line will become Muslim. But like from a geopolitical standpoint, that does not seem in the offing. It does seem like more serious and potentially nasty, potentially dangerous standoffs between larger and larger powers in the Middle East could be one of the things on the table. I see, though, I guess I'm trying to say in a very impressionistic and not particularly informed sort of way, that my sense is that this is not how the world burns. There are a few other things that strike me as likely to, or more likely rather, to set off that particular powder keg. This one looks more to me like that old joke about the two Jews who sit on a park bench and one of them reads the regular newspaper and another one reads a neo-Nazi anti-Semitic journal. And the one Jew says to the other, "What are you doing reading that trash? It's so full of stereotypes and hatred and vitriol." And the other guy says, "Look, I read the daily papers and the Jewish people are constantly under assault. We're being oppressed. We're always attacked. I read the neo-Nazi papers and we control the world, the media, global finance. I like good news." And this attack on this guy, this sort of pinpoint strike, if that's indeed what it was, is like the actual real life version of that paranoid neo-Nazi fantasy, but in like a thumbs up sort of way. I want the Israeli government, given the options in the area, in the region, I want the Israeli regime to be the one that is like picking out its enemies at very high levels in this minute technological strike sort of way. You read the New York Times, they're covering this like the way we would cover some major security failing in the United States government, like the way we talked about the FBI and the Secret Service after the near assassination of Donald Trump and the serious reckoning that our friends were all kind of demanding of how did we let this get this far. That's what the New York Times' coverage of this event sounds like, but for Iran. Like they're talking about Iran as if they have the same concern for the security of their regime as we have for the security of the American regime. So in that spectrum of possibilities, like the who are you rooting for spectrum of possibilities, I just feel like I recognize that there are many ways for this to go horribly south. But given that the situation is already one of very high stakes conflict, these are the guys that I want to be winning. And you take each day as it comes.
It's funny how people respond to supposed provocations of Iran. I remember when Trump killed Qasem Soleimani, right. that austere religious scholar, like the hero of people of color all around the world. He was a bodybuilder. He was a cleric. He was a master tactician. And then he was murdered by Trump. And I remember the mayor of New York at the time, Bill de Blasio, at a press conference, he was like, "Okay, well, we're now at war with Iran. So that's where we're at. And don't forget, Iran is a real country. Okay, this is a real serious country. And now we're at war." Nothing really came of it. I wonder why now this has gone on the left and the right for decades now. People saying that there are elements of the American security state deeply tied with Israel that are trying to force the United States into a land war with Iran. And it's just this constant thing we hear about, and it never happens. I mean, maybe someday it will. I just want to say, given and all of this talk about Iran's amazing technical capacity, and maybe I've mentioned this before, but it was a month or two ago that their president's helicopter went missing and they didn't know where it was for 24 hours. So I don't know. I mean, I just doubt that they're really if they can't keep, they don't have a black box on their or GPS transponder or something on their president's helicopter. I don't know. I'm not going to be I'm not so worried about their technical capabilities. I mean, maybe that's.
Maybe this is belaboring the obvious, but I guess that's my prerogative on this podcast. If there was an austere religious scholar who was a bodybuilder and a master of statecraft, but he was a white heterosexual Christian man, the reaction would be like, we must go kill this person. We must start World War III to ensure that this person who is a danger to everything good and sacred in the world is wiped off the face of glass this country so that someone like this can never threaten us again. And of course, instead, we got the opposite of that because he happened to be a brown Muslim man.
Yeah, it was a great tragedy. Everybody still misses Qasem Soleimani, and now they can miss Ismail Haniyeh. Another austere religious scholar and great man of peace. On the tech front, we had a major antitrust decision that came down yesterday against Google, ruling that Google exercises and maintains an illegal monopoly in search and defends it by paying other companies to direct their own traffic to the Google search engine. Now, Google says it's the biggest because it's the best, but others suggest that the climate is turning against big tech ultra dominance and that we may see more such cases coming down. What do you guys think? Is this a crack in the Google's mastery of all human knowledge, or what do you think?
Long time coming. Google is not what it used to be, but it's still. I mean, look, there are laws. We live in a sacred democracy where the rule of law is in place, and
in a society.
We live in a society. This is a big ruling, and I think the repercussions are going to be significant. It's going to be a minute as of right now before we get that kind of second wave of deep dives and commentary. But I think at a first cut, this is like I said, long overdue, and should really get the wheels turning in people's minds about reliance on companies that should not be as big as they are, and should not be as powerful as they are, and do not have the interests or the rights of the American people in mind and close to their hearts. And when companies like that are woven into the national security apparatus of the country, which includes organizations that are really off the map. I mean, when you look at something like NSA, especially in its relationship with even foreign intelligence, I mean, GCHQ, the British equivalent, basically has to total information sharing as far as we know with NSA. That is constitutionally suspect. And so, poking away at the Google part of this will hopefully have beneficial knock-on effects that radiate through the system and get Americans in a mood to recognize that we don't have to be prisoners to interpretations of our principles on things like Google that lead us to, on the one hand, they say, no, this is national security. You can't break up Google, or you can't say no to big tech. But on the other hand, they say, no, these are private companies. You can't, that attacks capitalism. You have to leave them alone. That's really created a sort of, Alice in Wonderland, topsy-turvy world where the American people, lose kind of no matter whether they are trying to be strong on defense or free marketers. That all needs to come to an end. So I think this will help get us there.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, myself included, are having a hard time psychologically getting past the headspace of the early days of the internet. Because when sites like Google first began to achieve the dominance they now enjoy, it really was, not to say something really obvious, but it was a very different time, and it felt very different, and it made a huge impression on many of us, especially, I think, those who were between the ages of, say, 12 and 35 at the time, or, dilate those ranges however you think appropriate. But there was a core group of people who during some major formative years, lived in a kind of golden age where it seemed as if this wild new technology was opening up enormous vistas to us. And it was almost impossible not to extrapolate that out. Even those of us who have our curmudgeonly conservative reservations about human progress not being linear and losing things even as you gain things and all of that, just emotionally, it was almost impossible not to extrapolate this moment out into an ever increasing openness of the world, that now you were just going to be able to find anyone anywhere. And this was heavily built into the rhetoric of the early internet, and companies like Google, they're not alone, but they were a major part of this. So we had this kind of golden age experience. And yes, of course, behind the scenes, all the seeds of our present discontents were being planted, and the deal was not what we assumed it to be. And in exchange for our free services, we were giving away all sorts of data that's now being wielded against us, and all the things we now know were true. But at the same time, also something new was being made possible, and that was thrilling. And it's now, I think, been really hard for people to realize, look, these programs actually are no longer at the forefront of the thing that they were once offering. Like, Google is now, for me, this weird, stunted little route that I take on the way to other websites that I basically know I'm going to. I know I'm going to Wikipedia or the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy or some site that I could just go to and search for the thing I'm looking for. But I still have that reflex that I'm going to type it into Google and then click on the Wikipedia link. Mm-hmm. And I think that will atrophy as these searches get worse and worse. And I think these large language models and chatbots will start to replace search functions with all and present all sorts of other difficulties. But one thing that we may be reckoning with in cases like this is that the idea of that like endlessly open and ever opening space where there was some website that would simply play host to your free journeys into the infinite was always kind of a fantasy and was never destined to materialize. And we're probably moving toward a more siloed version of the internet, siloed by country, siloed by purpose. You actually have to think about which tools you're using for what. It's a journey away from Eden, but toward maturity. I mean, you could wax poetic about it, but it just, like, I think that this case will probably, as James is saying, be the beginning of a larger set of transitions that really are pretty overdue at this point, because the stuff that we are giving, the places where we're giving our data and submitting our freedoms and all of that are no longer even delivering the thing that you used to get out of them. So that will probably gradually start to register with people as what they call the enshittification of the internet carries on apace.
Yeah, I like that phrase. Yeah. No, it's weird. I mean, I remember like decades ago, which is amazing to think this is how long we've been dealing with internet search. But I remember, I mean, searching used to be like interesting, and you would come up with all kinds of things. Like right. If you're just say, even like cyber stalking yourself, or, much less like, I don't know, local politicians or whoever.
Right.
You might stumble upon some odd little, like, I don't know, newsletter for like a church or a swimming pool that would have some reference. They don't seem to be scraping things anymore. It's all just like whatever. It's all pay for play. And then, pointing you to, Vox or Axios or whatever. I mean, I think the Google argument for its necessity has really played itself out. I mean, the fact that a couple weeks ago, or last week maybe, it was revealed that if you typed in attempted assassination of TRU into the Google search bar, what you came up with was first the attempted assassination of Harry Truman, and then also the various attempted assassinations of Rafael Trujillo of the Dominican Republic. The attempted assassination of Trump, which just happened, just was vanished. I mean, it wasn't even vanished. It just didn't exist. It wasn't like something you would have to really dig around for it. I guess they figure, well, they're in charge of what is known and of all knowledge. So why don't they just deliver it as they would like to deliver it? But, I think it's salutary if they're really going to be taken apart in some way. I don't know exactly what that would look like. I mean, what do they do? I mean, basically, it's this mega company just built on this search algorithm. It seems a little weird that it would be. I used to work for this guy who had been at Stanford when Brin and Page were there in the same department. I guess he knew them. I mean, and he might have been expressing sour grapes, but he would say, like, what they came up with is relatively trivial.
Right.
Like the algorithm, it just kind of, gained this purchase, and through network effect or whatever, or clever marketing.
Well, brand recognition. I mean, I do think the default impulse, it's like Kleenex. It's like defaulting to the name Kleenex anytime you want a tissue. You're just going to sell 1 million more boxes of tissues than if you are called whatever, Paper Lights. Like there is that very human and difficult to get over impulse that I was talking about, where it's like, if I want to search for something, it's really weird. Like, I know I want the Wikipedia page that is associated with the black body effect or whatever. And then I want to go into the footnotes and I want to read the papers or whatever. But I will still type black body effect into Google and then click on the Wikipedia link. Or if it's philosophy, I know I should just go to Stanford because that's where I'm going to end up. But I had a really weird experience the other day teaching my dad how to use ChatGPT, because he was like, can you show me how AI works? And I was like, kind of, maybe. But we had this very funny intergenerational exchange where I gave him the example of this Augustine quote that he had recently had to search for all over the internet and had a really hard time sourcing. And finally, it seemed as if someone in some book had written that it was attributed to Augustine, but he hadn't found the Augustine source. I was like, so let's see what ChatGPT does with this, since Google has not worked and even Reddit doesn't seem to be working. And ChatGPT, of course, came up with an extremely eloquent, eerily precise attribution of this quote that was completely wrong and totally false. And I was at every stage having to remind my dad, like, why this would happen, like what's going on behind the box that is giving you this hallucination. And I think that, that kind of unthinking, literally stupid intelligence is getting incorporated into all of these search sites at yet another remove. So it's not even that you're getting the ChatGPT, so you know what you're working with. It's like you're getting what looks like Google, which is supposed to be just delivering this informational report. And not only is that all now clogged with the money and the ads, but it's also clogged with their sort of inept rollout of this new technology. And really what everybody, I think, has to just do is kind of readjust to the fact that these are these other tools that we have that work in different ways and can do slightly different things for us. But like, I come back to just, I think there's a huge hurdle for us olds to get over, where you still just think of, Googling as a verb. It's it's just a synonym for what you do when you're looking for something on the internet. And the cognitive dissonance that it will take to get over that, I think, is significant.
So I just have one question about this, which is Tim Walz a box of Kleenex or the other leading brand?
Let me just throw in, I just got a text from a friend who was commenting about Tim Walz. He's like, this guy has Tim Kaine energy.
Yeah. The power of Tim.
Yeah. But just the idea that, like, I mean, how quickly these people are lauded as, like these tremendous counterweights. And then like, who? Like, I had sort of forgotten who Hillary Clinton's running mate was. But, what about, getting back to search. Some people I've heard people say that Bing is a better search engine than what Google does, and that it's actually a separate thing. It doesn't just feed into Google the way Yahoo, I guess, does or did. Do you have any experience with this? Is there any qualitative difference? I mean, is there an alternative? Is my question.
I see. Right. Well, I think in the long run, there's no alternative to what we all implicitly thought Google was going to do, because nothing can do that. In fact, it's sort of a fantasy about what machines can do, that they can so effortlessly and perfectly guide you to the information you need, that your own personal human-sized array of knowledge doesn't need to have any kind of linking sinew in it. And this is also kind of, I think, what people thought writing would do, or worried that the technology of writing would do, is that it would outsource the job of having the world in microcosm in your head. But no machine can do that. That is the privilege of man, to actually give shape and order to a group of information and data that wasn't previously there before, and thereby add structure and information to the world. There's only two things that we know that does that. One is a human consciousness. The other is God. So I think that there was a degree of idolatry or theology involved in what people thought Google was going to do, which was just take that job off our hands. And that's what I'm describing as we're sort of learning that was a false idol. I guess I would say that I use Bing almost not at all for search, which is probably a brand thing, but that I do use their image generator all the time, because it's a relatively quick and easy way to just get a picture that looks kind of good that I can slap onto some piece I wrote on Substack or something. And maybe that is indicative of a better software overall, but I don't know. I just think James, your question about is Tim Walz the Fruit Loops we have at home, or is he the Fruit Loops in the grocery store? He very distinctively, the whole energy of the Kamala campaign gives off-brand, knockoff youth culture. It all feels very much like the thing that is supposed to replace the thing, like the tofu, like the soy, like the watered down alternative to what used to be, to the Obama years, basically,
right.
to the excitement and genuine thrill and aesthetic sheen of that whole movement.
Well, even the branding of this candidacy that was just a replacement,
right,
and totally ersatz. There was no primary. She was just selected. But it's the way it's sort of presented as the will of the people. No, this is the true expression. This goes beyond primaries. But it reminds me of the way they, if they introduce something and call it new and improved, when that it's the same old thing and it's probably worse. Let me just say that I just looked at Bing and I put in attempted assassination of T, and it gave me 15 different suggestions. Attempted assassination of Tucker Carlson, the Pope, Reagan, George W. Bush, presidents, Pope John Paul II, Seward. I guess that's the Secretary of State under Lincoln. Attempted assassination of Bob Marley. I don't. So Trump does not appear. So I'm not giving any recommendations about Bing. Not yet.
Can I put out a call to our listeners, though, on the basis of that brief anecdote about ChatGPT, which is, if anybody can tell me where St. Augustine says inter facies et urinam nascimur, we are born amid feces and urine, basically.
I always thought that was from Pope Innocent III.
Okay, so that is one possibility that we found, but then we seem to have traced it further back to Augustine, but nobody can tell me where in Augustine it is. That's where the inquiry currently rests.
Okay.
And I would love to know if there's more information out there that is not search.
It's a great quote.
Generated. It's beautiful.
Maybe it's just Samuel Beckett. No, I don't know.
That sounds like it.
Kind of sounds like. All right. Well, listen. That's enough of our ramblings for today. Let's talk about something real, which is the fact that we have a website, AmericanMind.org, that prints like really strong commentary, probably about 10 items a week. And we like to draw your attention to the site. Spencer, what would you like to highlight for our listeners this week?
Okay, fresh off the digital presses today, put out just yesterday, a new Peachy Keenan. It's always a babe wake up, new Peachy Keenan just dropped kind of moment whenever Peachy puts out a new piece. But this piece, for the title alone, The Final Girl Boss. I don't know if that's a Peachy title or if you guys came up with it. It's so good. It's about Kamala Harris and her various inadequacies. I kept meaning throughout this podcast to note that whereas Kamala has yet to put forward a presidential platform or campaign statement this year, she does have a presidential platform, and it's from 2019. And one of the weirdest things about what's going on is the total revision without any accountability of her previous record. I think, Seth, you've said in the past that that's what Trump should be holding her to at every possible opportunity. Peachy raises this, and also just the sheer spitefulness of her demeanor and the snide, I'm speaking kind of attitude that she seems to exude. It's well captured and well expressed, as it always is with Peachy. The Final Girl Boss. Go check it out.
Yeah, that was a great piece, as is basically everything Peachy writes. Okay, I like this piece by Adam Ellwanger called Line Up, White Boys. The Democrats infantilize their least likely voters. Basically looking at the white dudes for Harris, Zoom meeting, which was absurd. But really looking at the question of like, well, what is the status of the white man in kind of like what we were talking about earlier, in left politics? As Adam says, identity politics is the only party in town. But there's one group who is never invited to the celebration. And, he makes the point that others have made too, but that it can't be called white men for Harris. It has to be white dudes. Same way, like you hear people call white men white boys.
Right.
That's a very common thing. Like, even like we indulged in it with white boys, referencing white boys summer or whatever. You never hear people, for good reasons, you don't go around calling black men black boys. But it's okay,
Right.
It's okay to infantilize and marginalize white men. I mean, there's an Asian Pacific white men for Harris, gay men for Harris. There's all kinds of various black men for Harris, but it can't be white men. And imagine a white men for Trump movement. That would cause a lot of consternation, I suspect. Okay, well, that's about all the time we have for this week. If you want to know more about everything we do, you can go to AmericanMind.org. If you'd like to support our work, you can click the support tab at the top of the page. We deeply appreciate your donations. Or you can leave a 5-star review for us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can subscribe to the podcast. Spread the good news by tweeting about us. Tell your friends. Post our items on social media. We appreciate all the support we get. And it's thanks to you, and because of you, we do what we do. Thanks to our production crew, Jake Gannon and Logan Zeppieri. And thanks to everyone for listening. Until next week, I'm signing off.